you need a substitute. You don't need a new and improved you. You don't need to get better. You need someone else to save you. You need another sacrifice. And Jesus Christ has done that. He has performed that. He has provided that way. Well, it's good to have you with us again today. I'd like you to turn to Numbers 3. And I was certainly hoping to be further along than chapter 3 in early May. So it's not looking like I'm going to be able to finish Numbers this year, maybe into early next year. But I'm thankful for the weeks we're able to have in Psalm 23 and then in John chapter 10. So I feel like today I sort of have to reintroduce the book, and it really does tie in with our remembrance of Christ at the table of communion that we'll have after the morning message. Numbers is the fourth of the 5 books of Moses. The scriptures begin, of course, with Genesis, where God, among other things, among creating the world, among flooding the world, chooses one man, Abraham, with a great staggering promise in Genesis 12. The narrative moves to Exodus, where you have the emergence and consolidating of the Jewish people. One man and his family become a nation. In Leviticus, we have laws for the worship of God's people. In Deuteronomy, we have some valuable reminders and commands and warnings. But this year, we are going to be looking at Numbers, where you have the movement of God's people, or I should say the hindered movement, toward possessing the land that God promised Abraham all of those years ago. The book covers one generation, 40 years. It's really about a nation that perished in unbelief, that were overwhelmed at the enemies around them, and so retreated rather than stepping forward in faith. Numbers was about the generation that perished and the next generation that were waiting, that would enter the land. The unbelief of God's people didn't mean that they would never go into the promised land, but it just meant that the unbelievers wouldn't. The unbelievers wouldn't. Those who wouldn't put their faith and trust in God missed out on some incalculable blessings. And so Numbers has been called the book where there are 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. Or to put it another way, unbelief slows things down. That's true of a nation, it's true of a family, it's true of a church family, it's true of an individual Christian. Unbelief just puts the weight on it, makes everything harder and slower and more grinding. And so if anything, Numbers should really give us a great shock. Numbers should really prod us to trusting God, to trusting him more quickly, more strongly, more firmly. Now, when we began this year in Numbers 1, we had a numbering of the 11 tribes. A few hundred years earlier, we had 70 souls coming from Canaan to Egypt. So we go from Abraham 1 through to 70 coming from Canaan to Egypt. And then a few hundred years later, they count some over 600,000 fighting men of those 11 tribes. And when you extrapolate those that were married and had children, all that kind of stuff, you come to millions of people potentially, millions belonging to this nation. And of those over 600,000 men numbered in chapter 1, fighting men, all but 2 would die in the wilderness, except for Caleb and Joshua. God numbered and he remembered all who would go out and fight for him. And then a number of weeks ago, we look at Numbers chapter 2, which dealt with the arranging of the tribes around the tabernacle. As they traveled in the wilderness, the tabernacle or the tent, this mobile worship center, was there in the middle, surrounded by the tribes as God had designed the Levites very close to that tent to make sure no outsiders came in to get too close and lest bring upon themselves God's judgment. The tribe of Levi, will be learning much about them today, essentially looked after the worship around the life of God's people. And so you have these themes of warfare, chapter 1. We're going to count the soldiers. And then in chapter 2, arranging of the tribes around the tabernacle. And as we'll look at chapters 3 today and 4 over the next coming weeks, to look at worship, you have two themes of warfare and worship. You've got to have both. The soldiers protected God's people from their enemies, and the Levites were to protect the children of Israel from their own disobedience through offering sacrifices, but also through guarding the tabernacle and all of its ministries. Someone said that Israel's camp with the tribes allotted around the tent was really an illustration of what we are to be today in the world, a pilgrim people following the Lord with his glory at the heart of everything and his presence leading the way. We say it again, we are a pilgrim people following God with his glory at everything, at the heart of everything, and his presence leading the way. It should be behind every decision we make. God, we want to please you. We want you to go with us in our decisions and in our plans and in our hopes. Now in Numbers chapter 3 and 4, one of the 12 tribes was to take care of the tabernacle and the sacrifices. Now that's unusual for one reason, is that according to Exodus 19, before the giving of the Ten Commandments, God told all of his people that they would be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The entire nation were to function as priests. They were to minister to the Lord. They were to be a reflection of God to the world. And yet from a nation of priests came a practical tribe, one of 12, who would exercise these functions. We're going to learn about this special tribe today, this special priesthood, to help people obey God's law, to bear witness of his goodness. Now, you may have noticed in the reading this morning from verses 1 to 4 that you have a record of Aaron and Moses when God spoke to them back in Exodus. And you have Aaron, who was the first high priest. They're both of the tribe of Levi. And in verse 2, you have Aaron's sons, Nadab, the firstborn, and Abihu, Eleazar, number 3, and Ithamar. Aaron, we could say Aaron had 4 sons. He had 4. By this point in the narrative, he has only 2. Why? Oh, his first 2, God killed them. That's what happened. Imagine trying to explain that to people. I've got 4 sons. Now I've got 2. Oh, what happened? God killed them. He killed them, struck them dead. That's what happened. And God struck these men. He struck these men because they had offered unauthorized worship. God had given them a very clear pattern of worship, and they flatly ignored it. The fire was to be offered by the high priest, not by his sons, and was to be taken from the altar. And yet self-assertive Nadab and Abihu disobeyed God. And you could imagine them thinking, well, we're the high priest's sons. We're his sons. And we're going to make an offering to God. We're going to make this. God's going to be okay with it. God was not okay with it. He was not okay with it. And Nadab and Abihu's positions as the sons, even the firstborn of the high priest, afforded them no protection from God's judgment. membership of the tribe of Levi was no guarantee against the alluring snares of sin. No one is immune. None of us are immune from the dangers and the temptations of sin. And this must have put the rest of Aaron's sons and the nation like on notice. Don't you trifle with my offerings. Don't you look to your own wisdom above my own recorded revelation about how offerings are to be given. And just a word of explanation. We have the tribe of Levi from which Aaron and Moses came. From the Levites came the priests. So not every Levite was a priest, but all priests came from Levi. That's how this would work. The priests were certainly the highest order of Levi. God had appointed them to that task. And so you have the priests, and then the rest of the Levites, and then the other tribes arranged by God in a certain way. Now, no hierarchy exists like us for that today. It's very, very different. Very, very different. It's a different kind of arrangement. God arranges things very, very differently today. And where God puts us is something that we have to kind of find out. Got to find out. It's not about family ties or birth. It's about wisdom and discernment. It's about being available to serve and trying things and getting the feedback and wisdom of God's people, so that every Christian that comes to this church and that serves here, and this is their church, everyone is going to ultimately be where they need to be, because the body tends to know where we fit if we're just open and available to however God wants us to serve him. That's just how things work. And look at verse 5 through to verse number 10. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Bring the tribe of Levi near and present them before Aaron the priest, that they may serve him." Now look at verse 7. "And they shall attend to his needs and the needs of the whole congregation before the tabernacle of meeting, to do the work of the tabernacle." You see, it takes a lot of effort to keep on offering sacrifices for people that don't stop sinning. It takes a lot of work. It's endless. And then you've got to pack up and move on and unpack and set up the sacrifice again, and people keep on sinning. They don't get it. They just keep on sinning. And so there's this endless, relentless work of the ministry and these endless sacrifices, because it's like sin has no end among these people. And look at verse 8, "And they shall attend to all the furnishings of the tabernacle of meeting." There were people that just looked after the furniture. The furniture. "And to the needs of the children of Israel, and to do the work of the tabernacle." Twice we have this issue about human need. So much ministry today is about meeting human need. There are many needs all around us. And verse 9 says, "And you shall give the Levites to Aaron his sons, and they are given entirely to him from among the children of Israel." God gives us the exact people group who are going to perform whether the offerings or the different needs around the offerings. So again, let's just mention some of the differences. The priests alone performed the duties inside the tent. The Levites helped transport the tent, and they would assist the priests. They wouldn't go near the sanctuary themselves. The Levites killed the sacrifices. Then the priests needed only to sprinkle the blood and to burn the fat. The Levites prepared the incense. The priests burnt it. These priests from Aaron's family needed reliable colleagues as their assistants at work. Neither could really function without the other. They're all needed. They're all needed. And what we often struggle with in life is we feel like we're not needed, or what we do is not needed. What we do is not needed. Feel as though if I just sort of dropped off the perch, then life would go on without a blip. Well, not in God's family. Not in God's family. There would be some real gaps that would need to be filled. And so we're often tempted to think that what I do is not important and I'm not needed. But friends, just as surely as the tribe of Levi not only moved furniture and sacrificed the animals so that the priests could bring the offerings themselves, so every believer today has a necessary function. It's a necessary function that is still true today. But look at the warning. Look at the warning of verse number 10. There's a warning here. And it's this. So you shall appoint Aaron and his sons, and they shall attend to their priesthood. But the outsider, we're not talking about pagans. We're talking about the other tribes. But the outsider who comes near shall be put to death. Just remember something God's word says. This is their task. It's their task. But if an outsider comes in, it's going to be the same penalty as for Aaron's 2 sons. We don't trifle with God's method of the dealing with the problem of human sin. It didn't matter, by the way, if you're ignorant. It didn't matter if you had no clue what the law was. You were just at risk of death as the deliberate outsider who comes in and who assumes this task. One Jewish tradition says that the Jews hung over the door of the temple a golden sword, perhaps like the one outside Eden, which was engraven, "The stranger that comes nigh shall be put to death." It'd be God, not man, who would determine the nature of the offerings and the very people who would bring those offerings. We know from the New Testament that Jesus Christ in 1 Peter 2 is called chosen by God and precious, rejected by men, chosen by God. Jesus was God's appointed sacrifice. And in verse 5, Peter says, you also are a holy priesthood. You offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And so God appointed this priesthood. This was his decision. And also meant that the priesthood could not be traded. It could not be corrupted. You couldn't have people coming in and getting special favors. This was God's appointed way. And then look at verse 11 to 13, please, with me. Look at verse 11 to verse 13. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Now behold, I myself have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel," notice this, "instead of every firstborn who opens the womb among the children of Israel. Therefore, the Levites shall be mine." Be tempting if you were part of the other 11 tribes to think, the Levites got nothing to do with me. Got nothing to do with me. The Levites. Oh, they're just doing their thing. Well, God says in a sense, well, if I didn't choose the Levites, be your firstborn. They'd be serving in the tabernacle. God had a special claim to the firstborn because he had judged Egypt's firstborn when he brings them out of Egypt. Brings them out. Death of the firstborn. because God granted them such a great deliverance and God spared their firstborn. God says, that firstborn that I saved and spared, he's mine. And he's still mine. He's still mine. And instead of requiring every family to give me their firstborn to serve as a priest, I'm going to choose one tribe. I'm going to choose one tribe to look after the ministry of the priesthood. Levi was the substitute tribe. And because of that, the whole nation had a stake in Levi. They had a stake in Levi. They were related to this business of offering. Some have said, in truth, the Israelites would have rather Levi look after this task than part with their firstborn. At the time of the Protestant Reformation, in the Roman Church, the highest thing, the best thing a good family could do was to give Rome a son to the priesthood or one of their daughters to become a nun. Similar kind of thinking. This was this sort of highest task. This would justify a family and children. Give your son or daughter to the priesthood. Well, the Lord here in Numbers 3 says, look, because all the firstborn are mine, they're mine, I spared you. So I'm going to choose Levi. And they're going to substitute. They're going to substitute for your firstborn. Is this principle of the firstborn son being surrendered to God, is this principle of what God gives you first. What God gives you first. Of course, you have a firstborn son or daughter, you may not get any more. It could be your lastborn. So it's a greater burden if you got to give your one and only. But I think you know where I'm heading with this. I think you know that in the fullness of God's word, Christ gave his one and only, his unique son. Jesus was God's son like no other. His unique, eternal son. His substitution for us was in our interests. Because we couldn't offer anything for our salvation, could we? We couldn't offer anything. Anyone. Couldn't offer ourselves. It'd be a tainted, sinful, worthless sacrifice. And so Levi was the substitute tribe. God was preparing his people for another substitute. Just getting them ready. He would prepare them over hundreds of years through the sacrificial system, this idea of an innocent dying in the place of the guilty. And God drafting a substitute tribe to serve him within the sacrifices and the offerings. There was going to be a surrender and a substitution. And for us today, we need to realize that what God gives us belongs to him. Unless we give God our best, then he gets nothing else. That's sort of how things work. And we need to find the place where God has desires for us to serve him. And sometimes it's through trial and error. It's through being willing to help wherever the need is. And you just after a little bit of time, faithfulness, you know, and I know, and others know, this is where this believer belongs. This is where they should be serving God. That's how it works. And we should be thankful today as we approach the Lord's table in a few moments that God has provided a substitute. If you're here today without Jesus Christ, You need a substitute. You don't need a new and improved you. You don't need to get better. You need someone else to save you. You need another sacrifice. And Jesus Christ has done that. He has performed that. He has provided that way for sinners to be saved.